Well, as you've heard from Tamsin and Nigel, the world's #1 tennis player is no longer being detained at Her Majesty's pleasure. Novak, Novaks, as some of the signs say. Novak Djokovic has been sprung from chokey by order of Mr. Justice Kelly in the Federal Circuit Court at Melbourne. And despite threats from the Australian government to deport him and ban him for 3 years, he has been cited at the Rod Laver Arena, getting ready for the Australian Open. What's going on back of this? Clearly, the decision by Australian immigration authorities to make an example of Djokovic was a political stunt. It's just a question of how high up in the government it goes. Britain's Home Office isn't above such stunts. You may recall the decision to deny the Dutch MP Geert Wilders entry to the UK at Heathrow when he'd landed to give a speech at the House of Lords. Lord Ahmed, the Labour peer, who's now a convicted child sex criminal, played a big part in that. A characteristically brilliant call by the Home Office. The point to bear in mind, as I tried to emphasise Friday, is that you can't get on a plane to Australia without a valid Australian visa permitting you to enter the country. In this case, the tennis player had a temporary activity subclass 408 visa. So Djokovic had the permission of Her Majesty's government to come to Australia, and then once he was en route, they changed their mind. Tyranny is always capricious. Djokovic followed the rules, was issued a visa under those rules, and then someone quite high up in the Aussie government said, screw the rules. Oh, but why would they damage the Australian Open? Well, if they cared a jot or tittle about international events in Australia, the last 2 years would have been very different. The lucky country consciously chose a form of extreme isolation far beyond any other major Western nation, and it's been a complete stinking flopperoo. Omicron is dripping off every light bulb in Melbourne. It's hanging off every Victorian constable's face mask. Australia is currently running at about 2,000 new COVID cases per million people per day. India is running at about 12 new cases per million people per day. Australia has 90% vaccination, India only 44%. But in various parts of the country, its health authorities have made widely available kits of cheap and cheerful therapeutics: paracetamol, zinc, ivermectin, azithromycin. Australia, or East Germany with koalas, as the internet wags have been saying now, Australia spent 2 years destroying normal life for no good reason. And by any rational measure, its policies are now a total failure. And so the Australian government needs a distraction, and Djokovic, a famous foreigner who's had the COVID recently, and therefore has something called natural immunity, which up to 2 years ago everybody used to believe in. So he's got the natural immunity, and he's no threat to anyone, but he was the perfect target. And judging from the sustained 2-minute hate from online Australians, a big chunk of all the mates, blokes, ockers and larrikings tossing another 4X on the barbie fell for it. Instead of hurling your Omicron-sodden boomerangs at Djokovic and waiting for them to come back at you, maybe you should man up and ask Scott Morrison to order up some of those cheapo Uttar Pradesh therapeutic grab bags before the next virus makes landfall. They're only 27 rupees, and they can hardly fail more than the last 2 years of Australian public policy. I'm not singling out Scott Morrison here. Boris Johnson, Justin Trudeau, Emmanuel Macron, Joe Biden. This is the biggest public policy failure in peacetime. And ScoMo won't be the last to find that it's easier to fluff up a celebrity distraction than climb down from the insanity. What do you reckon? I know Nigel was, the Farage was being barraged by people who are hot for vaccinations and have no sympathy for Djokovic. If you have sympathy for the rule of law, then the terms on which he boarded that plane should have been sufficient, and the Australian government should not have ripped them up halfway through the flight. You can email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at GBNews.